Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and welcome to the 200 special review. I still can't believe that I've actually done that many since 2013, like, damn. So today I decided to pick something that was very different and something that would be very challenging to review, and that being Wachenröder on the Sega Saturn. Now I have talked about this game a couple times on my channel before, but the thing is though, I always thought that it would be a very difficult game to review because it's a strategy RPG that has not been fan translated yet. And I've been waiting patiently to see if there ever would be some sort of announcement of a project of one being worked on, but I just never seen what happened. But then until I did some digging around and found out that someone on GameFAQs actually translated the entire story. I'll link it down in the description. So because of this, I am very thankful for the two that worked on the translation. Yeah, it was done by two people. In fact, it was actually done within 8 months. Now, they did explain a pretty interesting story on how they wanted to create this translation script, but the thing is though, I'm not going to go too much into detail about it here, but I will say that if you are interested, I do think it is worth a read. So yeah, that explains how I can actually play this game while still understanding its story, and trust me, it was not the easiest. But I did manage to get it done, so now let's begin. So the game was developed by Westone, although they used to be called Escape. That's the company that put out some of the early Wonder Boy games. And it was published by Sega, and it was released in 1998. A very late release for Sega Saturn, so late that it even beats out Panzer Dragoon Saga. So the chances of getting an English version back at that time was not gonna happen. So now let's get moving on and start talking about the game's story. So the game takes place on an island called Idolad. So this island is surrounded by a mysterious fog that is very dangerous. But there's many different towns and districts throughout the area. In fact, the setting for this game is actually done in a very steampunk style, and it's really cool looking. So it stars our main character, Lucien Taylor, who is a young man who always wants to become a knight. I know, how very typical, right? Well, he does have a twin sister, and in fact, when they were born at the same time, his sister ended up getting a really bad disease. But Lucien did not get it, so because of that, he has to take care of her and always does the best that he can. But as they are living by their day-to-day life, the Emperor Duran actually orders to build a water treatment plant. Now before I continue, I have to mention that Emperor Duran was probably named after the band Duran Duran, and the reason how I know is because there's actually quite a few musical references within this game. For such other examples, there is a character named Zappa, as in Frank Zappa. There's also another one named Blue Oyster, as in Blue Oyster Cult, and there's even two areas in the game called Gentle Giant and King Crimson. Yeah, so that's pretty fucking awesome. But anyways, because of the water treatment plant being built near where their hometown is, it actually makes things really bad for that every time it rains, his sister just gets even worse. So as time goes on, his sister ends up passing away, and because of this, Lucien now swears revenge on those that created the water treatment plant for that they sped up the process of her death. So as he is trying to set forth his adventure, he ends up running into a character named Carol, who is being attacked by a group of assassins. But after taking care of that event, they were actually rescued by a character named Small, who is actually the companion of the character Zappa. So anyways, Carol and Lucien end up having to work together because they were both looking for the same person, Emperor Duran. But of course for different reasons. In fact, Carol doesn't know about Lucien's true reason for looking for him. So that sums up the basics of what you need to know. So Lucien and Carol are always like wandering around the different areas, they meet different characters along the way, and as an example, they do meet a group of performers. And they happen to be called the Chemical Brothers. Yeah, so there's another music reference for you. So you got the head guy named Chemical, then you got Slim, then there's Idol, and then finally there's Belbit. Now the character Belbit is the one that actually speaks within the narration parts. Now, her character is blind, but you know what weapon they give her? They give her a freaking bow and arrow. Like, who thought that giving a blind person a bow and arrow would be a good idea? Well, I don't know, maybe she has, like, daredevil powers or something. And of course, there are a couple other characters, like there's Royal Guards, there's even a character named Orange. And the final one I'll mention is a character named Titus, and yeah, I know, you can't help but think of the one from Final Fantasy X, I know. So for the time being, I will talk more about the story later on, but now let's get to the other stuff, like the gameplay. So the story progression is very linear, you just go from one area to the next one and after some cutscenes. And once you reach your next destination, then it'll ask you to save your game, or you can check your status, which is basically to change up your equipment. And some locations will have a open marketplace for you to buy stuff from. And then of course there's also the next progression area. Thankfully, there are some areas within this game that are in English, but then there's others that are not. For an example, the items in this game are not in English. But as for the battles, they are turn-based with a grid-style map. And the biggest strategy part that I can tell you all is that being at a higher plane in this game, you have a better advantage on dealing damage and taking less damage. So you have different options for every character. You got walking, attacking, action, and then the 3 dots. So I really don't think walking needs to be explained. But as for the attacking, well, you have different options here. So you got regular attacks, and then there's special attacks, and you got 2 of them. But of course, the second one cannot be unlocked until later on in the game. So let's explain how attacking works in this game. So whenever you do a regular attack, a number with a circle dial will appear. So whenever this shows up, all you do is that you hold down, and it'll go up from 1 till 5. So the higher numbers means more damage, but of course it also means more heat on your heat gauge. So the heat gauge shows you how hot your weapon is. And when your weapon is at maximum heat, that means you won't be able to attack or do any of your special attacks. And cooling down your heat gauge is easy just by waiting around. But I should also mention that there's weather effects within the game as well. So when it's warmer outside, that means that the heat gauge will rise up a bit more than usual, but if it's colder, then it will be less. So yes, you don't want to use the basic level 5 attack all the time, because if you ever have a weak enemies, then you can just use one of the lower numbers, and therefore you're not raising up the heat gauge. And as for the special attacks, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just a really cool looking attack, and actually plays a battle animation for it. And it does gain up your heat gauge a bit more, and also it does take up more AP. Because you can attack multiple times within a turn as long as you have enough AP. Now as for the actions, this allows you to interact with switches, use items, and possibly do magic, which allows you to heal. Of course, only certain characters can use that function though. And as for the dots, that just allows you to wait in the same spot, takes up all your AP, but it does lower your heat gauge. So yes, at the start of each turn, everyone has 99 AP, and within that, you can do whatever you want with it. And just by the way, the first time I played this, the special attack button, I thought it was actually a defend option because the swords are crossed, but nah, it's actually special attack. Just figured to let you all know about that. So while it is for the most part a pretty easy to understand tactical RPG system, I also do appreciate the differences that they made to it with adding in the heat gauge, and also the way how they did the AP system was pretty interesting. Also, this game having a heat gauge makes sense given that all the characters' weapons are all ran on Steam. And of course, I'm not talking about the one owned by Valve. But yeah, I do think it does work rather well. So now, let's get moving on to the other things like the graphics. So for a game that was released in 1998 for Sega Saturn, you'd expect this game would look at least good, right? Well, yeah, I think this game looks really great. So the 2D sprites are great, and as for the 3D stuff, I still think it looks pretty good, at least fits the setting perfectly. In fact, all the battle animations are all done in 3D, and yeah, obviously compared to nowadays, it's rather dated looking, but I still think it looks really good for Saturn standards. But the animations within these parts do look really good though. And I really love the game's setting a lot, so you get a lot of really cool looking set pieces that are really interesting. Like I said, this game takes place in like a steampunk world, which is something you don't really see too much of. And what makes it even better is that it has a very dark and bleak atmosphere to it. But as much as I love all this, I would say that my favorite part about it would easily have to be the art direction and the character art. So as I said, the game has a very dark tone to it, which I do really like, and of course, the character design is just really great. And just as a bit of a fun fact, but there are actually 2 people that did work on the game's art. So the first one was Yoshitoshi Abe, who happens to be the one who did the character designs in Serial Experiments Lane, and the other ones happen to be Range Murata, who happened to do stuff like Last Exiles, the fighting game series Power Instinct, and finally I'll mention is the game Spy Fiction. Yeah, that random game that was made by Swery. Yeah, pretty awesome. So if you're a fan of any of these kind of things, then you'll definitely love it here. And I'm pretty sure that most of you that are familiar with them would probably recognize it immediately. So yeah, not only do I love the game's art, but I also do love the character designs as well, for that they all do look really cool and well detailed. And what's crazy too is that even some of the more generic characters that you only see like one time, even those characters are like really well detailed. I was like, damn. But overall, I would say that the graphics in this one are not only really nice, but it also goes to show you that even releasing a game in 1998 for the Sega Saturn, you could still put out a really nice looking game that is pretty impressive. And now, as for the game's music, the music in this game is just fantastic. I mean, I'm pretty sure it comes as no surprise for anyone that has been watching my channel long enough that heard me talk about this game in the past, but yeah, I freaking love the music in this game. So the game was composed by 3 people, that happens to be Takayuki Nagishi, Satoshi Miyashita, and finally, this is the one on how I discovered this game, and that happens to be Ian McDonald. For those that are unfamiliar, he was actually a member of the band Foreigner and King Crimson, and I'm a huge King Crimson fan, so the fact that he did the music for this game was like an insta interest. So if you're familiar with all 3 of these composers' work, then you know that this OST does not disappoint. So you got a pretty big variety of stuff. You got a lot of relaxing tunes that are more chilled out, you got some atmospheric stuff, you also got some like rockin' tunes which are very progressive sounding, really love those. And it all fits the game perfectly. Now even though that Ian McDonald only worked on a couple songs on the game's OST, I think that the other 2 did a damn good job still capturing his vision. And trust me, I can gush about this OST all damn day, but even doing that won't even do it justice, so I'll just say that just listen to the OST on YouTube somewhere. It's just so freaking awesome, highly recommended. So now, as for the game's voice acting, well, as you would expect, it's all in Japanese, and because of this, I can't really tell if it's actually like good or bad, as I always say, but there were actually 2 roles in here that I was somewhat familiar with. So the main character, Lucien, is also voiced by the same one who did the voice for Trunks from Dragon Ball Z, which is pretty cool. And I also remember that one of the royal guards in this game was voiced by the same one who did the voice for Bayonetta, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, not much I can say, but it does sound pretty good as far as I can tell, which is not very much, but pretty cool that these voice actors were a part of such an obscure game like this. So now, if you want to go out and buy yourself a copy of the game, at least I can say that this game is actually very affordable. The cheapest I've seen it for was $15, and the highest I've seen it for was about $30. So definitely cheaper than Panzer Dragoon Saga by a lot. And one thing that is really cool about owning a physical copy of the game if you get it complete, it also comes with some extra bonuses that you see here, like you got like an art book which has a lot of really nice color and detail to it. Hell, even the manual itself is very bright and colorful. And it also comes with a sticker of the character Carol. Now it may seem pretty tame in comparison to the likes of Working Design, but the fact that they even did any of this at all for the regular edition is pretty sweet. So now, for the 200th time, as my overall thoughts on Wachenröder is that the game did not disappoint. It was actually really good. So let's talk about the story parts first. Now, I'm not going to be mentioning any spoilers, even though this game is old, but the thing is, though, it's an old game that barely anyone that speaks English played. But I will say right now that I really do like the story quite a lot, but it does have some parts in it that are pretty, typical RPG tropes. For an example, there's the main character always wanting to become a knight, because how many games have done that before. Also, the main role of Carol is pretty easy to take a guess at, and as soon as you look at a picture of the main bad guy, then you know that he is going to be the main bad guy. It's just super obvious. But you know what? I'm perfectly fine with it, because I feel like that what's important here is the way how they tell the story, because I have to say, a lot of the characters in here are not only very likable, but also have some really good character interactions. And there was some really interesting world building here. I actually felt like I really cared for this world. And despite the fact that I said that there was some typical stuff that are obvious, there were actually a few twists that I thought were pretty interesting. Like one example that I won't go too much into detail about is that there's actually a bad guy character that goes through a lot of shit within his backstory, and I thought it was really depressing and well written. Especially the way how it was revealed, it was well done. So while the story may not be the most original thing ever, and may not be the most mind-blowing, but I felt like for what it is, it was just really well done, well told, and of course I just really loved the setting and the world. And the gameplay itself was still rather solid. For for that the battle system is rather simple, but is easy to understand, and also does have some pretty interesting mechanics for, like I said, with the whole heat gauge meter and the AP. And one good thing I can say is that if you're not super huge into tactical RPGs and you're not great at them, I can say that this is actually a pretty good beginner-friendly one, for that the game is typically not that hard. So I can recommend it to those that want a more easygoing tactical RPG, at least an easygoing tactical RPG that is not in English yet. Now, because I said this game was more on the easier side, I also have to say that if you're like hardcore into tactical RPGs and you have to play everything that's like the hardest of the hardest games ever, well, yeah, this game is going to be pretty damn easy to you, and you probably will be disappointed. But for me personally, I've said this many times on my channel, but I don't mind some games being more on the easier side. Sometimes I just want a game where I can enjoy the story without being too stressed. And like I said, it's more easy to recommend for those that do want to try out the genre. And of course, I don't have a problem with games being really difficult either, as long as it's balanced well. Now, there may seem like that there's not much to complain about here, for that there's really not much wrong with the game, but there is one minor thing I have to mention that is kinda weird. So whenever you get the Royal Guard characters in your party, if you notice that they actually don't have like a health meter shown, like their health is like blanked out. So you never know exactly how much health they have, and by the way, they can die, so like, I don't know what the hell's up with that, but I just think that's just so freaking weird. But thankfully there is no permadeaths in this game, so I guess that's another thing that's good to mention. But other than this, I really have a hard time trying to figure out exactly what else is wrong with the game. Everything is just pretty well made and just has a really good story, and just found it to be very enjoyable. Now, I don't know if I'd say it's like the best of the best, but I would say that it definitely was one of the better RPGs that I played on the Sega Saturn. And I would recommend it, of course as long as you're a fan of games within this style, and if you plan on playing through the game real soon, then you'd also have to be okay with wanting to read the game's story on the GameFAQs website. Which I totally do understand why most people wouldn't bother with that, because it is kind of a pain in the ass, but here's me hoping that we can get this game a fan translation in the near future. Because if this game ever did get one, I would gladly replay it again. So there you have it, that's the 200th review that I've ever done, and the first review I've ever done on an RPG that has not even been fan translated. So I'll be taking my break on doing game reviews for a little while. Of course I am going to be back, but I think after doing 200 of them, I think I deserve a little bit of a break, don't you agree? Well anyways, with that said, thanks for watching and commenting, have yourselves a great day, and I will be ending this video off with the greatest ending theme credits that you'll ever hear.